Hi guys, welcome back to yet another fun DIY video here about good old Athena. In case you're not familiar with my channel, this lovely looking boat here behind me is Athena. She's a 1987 Warrior 38, and in around 2 years my girlfriend Ava and I hope to be able to move aboard, but as you can see there's still some loose ends to tie up. One of those loose ends is an osmosis treatment that I'm slab dab in the middle of. Over the last week and a half, Ava and I have been laying up glass here on the side of the hull. We have, thank God, finished laying up glass because that was a lot of work. And the next step is going to be to fair the hull, which, to put it mildly, I have been dreading. On a little side note, earlier today I dropped Ava off at the airport. She's on her way back to LA where she lives, and she's left me to my own devices here in Denmark. I of course miss her something fierce, but I will try and limit the on-camera crying to an absolute minimum. On a positive note, there are only 83 days till I get to see her again. The reason I've been dreading fairing the hull is because it's a lot of work, a lot of tedious work, a lot of glorious sanding. But I do have a little bit of a secret weapon. And here is that secret weapon. It is a bunch of tools from a company called FlexiSander. There are some manual filling tools, some manual sanding boards, and a power sander. The common denominator for all of these tools are that they are very flexible. They should conform to the shape of the hull, and that means I should be able to apply less fairing compound, which in turn means less sanding. In the interest of being completely honest, let me just point out that I've purchased some of those FlexiSander tools with my own money, and some of the tools have been lent to me by FlexiSander free of charge for the purpose of making these videos. As far as fairing compounds go, I have two options, both of them from Wessex. I can either use 105 thickened with 407, or I can use a pre-mixed fairing compound from Wessex ProSet series. I figured it would be fun to do a little bit of a comparison between the two products. So I'm going to do one side of the hull with the TLG 625, which is the fairing compound from the ProSet series, and the other side of the hull with good old-fashioned 407. This is what 407 looks like. It's a powder you add to Wessex 105 epoxy. That means you first have to mix the resin and the hardener, and then you put in the filler. That's a little bit of an added step compared to the fairing compound from the ProSet series. With the TLG 625, all you need to do is to scoop out one part of each of these, smush the two together, and you're ready to go. In the beginning of this video, I mentioned that we are in the middle of an osmosis treatment, and I want to point out that the products I'm using in this osmosis treatment are all sponsored by two companies, HF Industry and Marine right here in Denmark, and Wessex Resins and Adhesives in the UK. And the process we're going to be following is outlined in this manual from Wessex. Enough yammering on, let's get started. And the first step is going to be to remove all of the peel ply from the side of the hull. And that is all the peel ply removed from the starboard side of the hull. I'm not going to lie, that was pretty fun, but let's go ahead and take a closer look at the hull. As you might be able to see, there are some strips here that in color look a little bit lighter than the surrounding areas, but that's simply just where two strips of fiberglass overlap. I'd say overall, the laminate Ava and I laid up looks pretty dang spiffy. There are no major voids, no major bubbles, no bubbles basically, it's perfect. I am more than pleased. Looking at the surface, it looks pretty smooth, and as a starting point for fairing the hull, this is definitely not bad. I'm sure once we start applying the fairing compound, we're going to be able to see some low spots and some high spots, but yeah, I am very pleased. Because we used peel ply on the surface, no further prep is really required. I am basically ready to start fairing this. But before I do that, there are some areas I just want to give a light sanding. I doubt they're going to show up on camera, but from the areas where the peel ply overlap, there are some areas where there's some fibers from the peel ply stuck in the laminate, and I'd like to just get those out of there. And also the area up here by the waterline, that could use a little bit of smoothing out. And just like that, it is the next day. I finished sanding most of the hull yesterday. There's still a tiny bit in the aft end of the boat, but I've sanded enough that I can get started fairing the surface. I hope this close-up will give you guys a better idea of what the hull looks like right now. As you can see, there are some areas where there's a slight waviness to the laminate, and that is what I hope to get rid of with the fairing compound. Here I've got two blobs of the fairing compound from the Pro Set series. This is the resin and this is the hardener. As you can see, it's a simple 1-to-1. It looks like this is a nice uniform color now, so let's get busy fairing. I would like to point out that I'm not an expert. I've never faired a hull before, and I think it's safe to say if I can figure this out, well, then anybody can figure it out. For a complete novice, I think this looks pretty decent. There are definitely some areas where I need just a little bit more fairing compound, but Rome wasn't built in a day, and I can go ahead and apply a second layer of fairing compound once this first one has cured. I'm about a quarter of the way there on the starboard side of the hull. This is going to be a lot of work, but sadly I am out of time for today. We can come back tomorrow once that is cured and take a closer look at how I did. Good morning, guys. I am usually a little bit too optimistic when it comes to estimating how much time goes into any given task, and yesterday was no exception. I fully expected to be done applying the first layer of fairing compound to the starboard side of the hull yesterday, but it didn't quite go that way. I'm back at my day job, so I only have the afternoons and the weekends to work here aboard Athena. The good news is, today is a Saturday, so I can put in a full day. I managed to apply fairing compound to about a quarter of the starboard side of the hull yesterday. Some of it has some low spots in it, some of it is a little bit too light, especially back here, but some of it is absolutely perfect. One of the things I love about DIY is learning new skills. Because I'm usually here aboard the boat all by myself, it's usually a bit of trial and error. So when you get something perfect, like this strip right here, it's very fulfilling. And this is definitely what I should be aiming for with the rest of the hull. All this needs is a very light sanding. As far as the rest of the hull, I was either a little bit too light on the fairing compound, resulting in low spots, or I pushed too hard with the fairing board, resulting in the texture from the laminate pushing through. So I'm going to have to go over the entire hull, but this section, the perfect section, has me very excited. I better stop yammering on and get back to applying fairing compound. Cue a time lapse. So far, so good. I am done with the starboard side of the hull with the exception of a small area on the keel. I'm almost out of the fairing compound from the Pro Set series. I am literally scraping the bottom of the barrel. I doubt this little blob here is going to be enough to fair that area on the keel, so I think I'm just going to hold off on fairing that area. Meanwhile, I can go ahead and get started fairing the port side of the boat. That's the side that's going to get faired with 105 plus 407, that other type of fairing compound I mentioned a little earlier in the video. I don't know if it's accurate to call it a fairing compound. It is 105 resin plus some hardener and then thickened with 407, which is a low density filler. The end result should be something that is, at least in appearance, similar to the fairing compound from the Pro Set series. Slight change of plans. I mentioned earlier that I was planning on fairing one side of the hull with the Pro Set stuff and the other side with 105 plus 407, but turns out I much prefer to work with the Pro Set stuff. In this tiny section that I've faired here, I do have an issue with tiny bubbles in the fairing compound. I've never had that before, and I've used a fair bit of 407 up on deck last summer, so I don't know what's going on there. I don't know if they're going to show up on camera, but right here is a bunch of those tiny little holes. Those tiny little pinholes are going to require more fairing compound, and I think because of the little pinholes and also because of the fact that I think the Pro Set stuff is a lot easier to work with and a lot faster to work with because you don't have to do all of that mixing, has me thinking I should probably just go ahead and order some more Pro Set fairing compound Monday morning. I'll have that a few days later and I can get on with fairing the rest of the hull. One of the awesome things about West System is they have a technical support line you can call if you've got questions, and there are some very knowledgeable people there to help you. So I'm going to call them Monday to see what might be causing those tiny bubbles. At least I've got a small section of each of the types of fairing compounds on the hull, so tomorrow we can go ahead and sand each of them and see if there's any kind of difference in how difficult they are to sand. But as far as applying the fairing compound, I much prefer the Pro Set stuff. Good morning, guys. It is Sunday morning, and what better way to start out a Sunday morning than by doing some glorious sanding. It seems both sides of the hull have cured fully, so let's just go ahead and get started. This is no doubt gonna suck pretty hard, but let's just jump right into the deep end of the pool and get started with some manual sanding. I'm going to be using this stuff, which is a sanding net. It's called Apranet. It's the 80 grit version, and this stuff has an excellent reputation. Before I started sanding, I took some measurements and I drew a quick pencil line here. This area, the area that I've sanded, is roughly 1 square meter, which represents about 2% of the entire hull. I think it's safe to say by the time I'm done sanding the hull, I am going to be the Danish version of Arnold Schwarzenegger. But at least the area that I've sanded looks pretty dang spiffy. When I run my hand across the surface of the hull, I can feel a few imperfections, like for instance right here. There is a small one right here, and then there's a big one right here. These are a little bit too deep for me to just keep sanding there. I need some fairing compound on there and another light sanding, and then they're going to be gone. But the good news is, other than those few areas, the hull both feels and looks absolutely perfect. The little 1 square meter area I've sanded here took around 1 hour and 15 minutes. Figuring in the size of the hull, that means I should be done in roughly 60 hours. Hopefully my speed will improve a little the more time I spend sanding, but I am certainly crossing my fingers. It won't end up taking 60 hours worth of sanding to fair the hull, but I guess we'll find out. Guess who is now 4% done sanding the hull? This guy. This side did seem like it was a little bit easier to sand, but I had more fairing compound on there, so I was sanding less fiberglass and more fairing compound, and that's just going to be easier any day. In terms of sandability, I would say the two fairing compounds are very similar. There's not a huge difference. The Pro Set stuff is a little bit easier to mix and, at least in my opinion, a little bit easier to apply. But there are some good arguments for choosing 407. For instance, if you have extra epoxy lying around, well, I would happily go with 407. In my case, this is actually earmarked for the barrier coat, so we'll save this for that. And also, if you're just fairing a tiny area like the hole from an old through hole, well, I would be happy to go with 407. But as for the rest of the hull here aboard Athena, I am gonna go with the ProSet stuff. Like I said, it is just a little bit easier to mix up and also maybe a little bit easier to apply. I know this video is a little bit on the short side, but I want to get back to sanding the hull and how much sanding can I really put in one video. Hopefully by next weekend I'll have fairing compound on the entire hull and be done sanding the starboard side, but let's see how that goes. If you've got any kind of tips on what I should be doing differently, maybe something that could make my life a little bit easier or speed up the process, I would love to hear them. But yeah, I guess that is going to be it for this video. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like. See you!